In this video, Sam and I are going to discuss the USDA REAP Grant, historically what the USDA REAP Grant was, and some of the changes and the evolution of the REAP Grant over the last several years, where we are now, and what we can expect in the future with as much information as we know. So welcome, Sam. It's good to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Warren. Good to be here.
Historically, prior to the Inflation Reduction Act in August of 2022, the USDA REAP Grant was relatively simple. We had 2 rounds a year, the first round being in October, the second round being in March for the USDA fiscal year. And it was a 25% award amount. And if you were a $20,000 or less grant, you went in the fall round, and then in the spring round was grants of all sizes were available. There were some reserve rounds for each, but relatively simple. 25% grant, 2 rounds a year, and that's it. And then in August of 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed and signed into law, and that brought a world of changes. Some things that have been great for solar, and some challenges for the USDA. And then obviously the new administration really created some consternation around all of this as well. So with that backdrop, Sam, why don't you take us back maybe to the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022 and the changes that brought to USDA, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So dating back to the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, this bill really put an unprecedented level of funding out, federal funding out into the economy for renewable energy systems and technologies. So in particular, the Inflation Reduction Act, in addition to the existing Farm Bill funds that had been there prior, as you mentioned, the funds created a new program, or allowed for the creation of a new program under the USDA REAP Grant program that allowed projects to be funded up to 50% of project costs through Inflation Reduction Act allocations. And in addition, there were additional rounds that were made possible for applications to go in. And these rounds occurred quarterly. So instead of having a fall and a spring round each year, we now had one round every 3 months where projects could be funded up to 50%. So this was a major improvement for the industry, and allowed for more subsidies for rural America and small businesses, agricultural producers, all of those clients that we typically talk about. However, with that, all that great opportunity also created an immense increase in workload for the USDA. So with all of the additional applications coming in, all of the processing timelines, the USDA was certainly working as hard as they could to get through those, but there was certainly a backlog of applications to process. In the about 2 years where we really saw grant applications being processed, they were on top of things. Some things slowed down here and there, but we really started to see this come to a bit of a pause under the new administration. So fast forward to the end of 2024, when President Trump was elected, and then the beginning of 2025, we started to see somewhat of a whirlwind be created for the renewable energy space. And I don't know, Warren, if you'd like me to kind of pause there, or dive into the next section too.
Yeah, no, let's just to recap and put a bow around the Inflation Reduction Act. The prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, the 25% grant rounds were all funded as a result of the Farm Bill. Then came the Inflation Reduction Act that provided separate funding for these 50% grants, and customers could choose. They could still apply for the 25% grant, or they could apply for the 50% grant. You can't go for both of them at the same time. But obviously 50%, along with all of the tax credits and depreciation and other incentives, just made it an incredibly attractive investment for businesses and farmers. And so, no, that's great. Let's jump into the new administration.
Sure. Sure. So there have been a lot of changes in the last 8 months, but certainly the first quarter and somewhat into the second quarter of 2025, there was a bit of whiplash throughout the renewables industry for sure. So following the election of Trump and his administration, as early as January 20th, we saw the first executive order come into play from their administration. And this sort of comes after a lot of the campaign points that we saw leading into the election of Trump's administration. You might recall that they certainly campaigned on ending the quote, Green New Scam. That was a term related to the Inflation Reduction Act in its entirety and some of those subsidies. They also, the Trump administration campaigned on reducing the size of government. And so both of those things, we really started to see some effects come through executive orders and various announcements, policy changes under the new administration. So back to where I was heading, as early as January 20th, immediately following Trump taking office, we received, or the country received its first executive order that essentially froze any unobligated funds that were previously made available by the Inflation Reduction Act.
Right.
At the same time that this was released, this essentially created a de facto cancellation of any in-progress competitions for the USDA's REAP program and any other federal program that was funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. At the same time, in line with their campaign message of reducing the size of government, we saw pretty substantial layoffs of federal employees throughout the first quarter of this year. Now, the administration essentially proposed this in a way of you can accept this buyout option, some almost posed as an early retirement type benefit. And we did see some employees take advantage of that, but we also saw pretty substantial layoffs, and the USDA was not immune from that. So in addition to the immense workload that was created under the Inflation Reduction Act, we had tons of applications in there. The USDA then lost staff, and we really saw things start to come to a screeching halt. So as I mentioned, the de facto cancellation of that first quarter of competition, since January of this year, we really only saw a few applications receive any type of processing. And these were specific to the Farm Bill rounds, Farm Bill funded projects. As you mentioned, interested applicants could pursue either category of funding. Funds either made available by the Inflation Reduction Act or through the Farm Bill. If they chose to proceed with a Farm Bill application, those funds were not frozen because that was a separate and existing program. Those funds were not made available through the Inflation Reduction Act. So the USDA was able to continue processing those applications while the rest remained frozen.
However, during that time, almost everybody applied for the 50% as opposed to the 25%. So the overwhelming majority of those applications were, in fact, from the Inflation Reduction Act, and it was undoubtedly a period of chaos.
Absolutely, yes. Especially, some of the lead times with these rounds of competition. You often assume that there will be about a quarter, 3 months between the time that you submit your application until the time that you are awarded funds and can proceed with your project. And 3 months prior to the election, nobody was taking any bets on the fact that funding would be paused or eliminated in to any extent. And so, yes, to your point, the vast majority of applicants figured I might as well go for 50% if the option's there. So following January, we came to March, and this saw a subsequent announcement by the USDA, which at the time was relatively promising. So at the end of March, the USDA announced that they essentially received a green light to continue processing and releasing funds that were previously obligated. So what this meant was between the time that you submitted your application and received a grant award and the time that the January 20th executive order was released, your funds were sort of on hold, but they were safe. And at the end of March, the USDA committed to releasing those funds that were previously obligated. So that was great news for the industry, great news for thousands and thousands of hopeful grant applicants, grant recipients. And this sort of unblocked a good bit of that backlog.
And we've actually seen that in action. So if there's any customers out there who are skeptical about this, we've seen the release of those funds for previously obligated projects happening since then.
Exactly. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. And so after March, things were relatively steady, if you can believe it. And then we get to the end of June, and between March and June, that's when we really started to hear talk about the quote, one big beautiful bill. This was HR 1, I believe it was. And we came up to the end of June. It was around June 30th, I believe. And this was when we started to hear some talk about new NEPA regulations, the National Environmental Policy Act. We heard about some changes to their regulations. Some were intended to reduce the level of red tape involved with building projects and construction projects with respect to environmental policies. And some, with every conversation, we heard that there would be particular carve-outs or provisions that were intended to almost stifle renewables, specifically wind and solar. And at the time, this was just a press release. There was no information that really came along with that. However, on the same day, the USDA did release a national announcement that the summer round of IRA funded competition, or Q3 rounds of competition, applications would not be accepted. So when we think about this timeline, Q1, everything was put on hold. We get all the way through through the end of March. We do not hear that there will be a second round. Everything is still on hold except for previously obligated funds. Everybody was hopeful that at the end of June, start of July, we would have a new round of competition. We could dive back in as we previously had. But one day before that application window opened, we unfortunately heard that everything would go back on hold, and essentially that we would await guidance on the result of the one big beautiful bill and whether or not it would pass through Congress. So we fast forward just about a week, and on July 4th, the one big beautiful bill did pass. The bill in its entirety did go through Congress and was signed into law by President Trump. So throughout July and even into August, we received subsequent executive orders, press releases, announcements from various federal agencies, memos from the White House. This is when the whiplash really began. It seemed like almost every week there was new guidance, different changes, policy updates, speculation on the future of industries. And so it was certainly chaotic during that period. And essentially where we landed today, and as of the recording of this video, what we know is that as of the middle of August, the USDA does expect to resume processing applications with a few relatively minor changes to the previous program guidelines. And we can certainly go through those here. The good news is that, again, these are relatively minor. There was a lot of speculation that the programs would be completely overhauled, completely eliminated, and that does not seem to be the case. So we're certainly excited about that. And we can dive into the updates and what we know now.
And so, with that being said, we are expecting a fall round, an October round, for both the Farm Bill as well as the IRA funded option, 25% or 50%. We don't know funding levels, do we?
We do not. That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. And talk about where we are now. Are you expecting any changes to scoring? It being more difficult to be awarded in a grant, differences between roof mounts and ground mounts. What are we expecting going into this October round?
Yes. So as of August 19th, we saw a formal press release from Brooke Rollins, the Secretary of Agriculture, and she explicitly stated that several changes affecting wind and solar industries in particular, and their federal funding levels would take effect. And based on that press release, we know the following. So first, wind and solar projects are going to be ineligible for B&I, business and industry guaranteed loans through the USDA's programs. Now, we don't often take advantage or capitalize on loan programs. We typically tend to utilize grant opportunities much more. So we're not terribly concerned about this update, but it certainly will affect the industry at large. Number two, wind and solar projects are ineligible for Rural Energy for America program. That's the REAP program that we've been talking about, guaranteed loans as well. So essentially, 1 and 2 loans are effectively going away based on this press release. Now, the one caveat here is that we are still waiting for formal guidance for fiscal year 2026 for the REAP program. So we will have to see what that guidance outlines as far as specifics. But based on this press release, wind and solar projects will be ineligible for guaranteed loans. Third, and this one does explain what we will see as far as changes to the grant program for solar. Solar projects essentially are going to remain eligible. So this is great news. However, they will be disincentivized through various scoring criteria. So what we know are essentially 4 things. 1, ground-mounted solar projects that are larger than 50 kW DC will be disincentivized through their scoring. We do not know what level of we could say penalty will be applied to a grant application score, but if you are a ground-mounted solar project, you can expect to probably lose a few points. Number 2, ground-mounted solar projects with no historical energy use or on-site load will similarly be penalized in their scoring. So we definitely see this occasionally. If you are what is called a generator system and you are simply creating electricity to put out into the grid, you don't have historical use, there will be a scoring penalty applied there as well. Number 3, ground-mounted solar projects proposed on certified cropland will be penalized in their scoring. Now, this is relatively vague language, right? Certified cropland could mean a myriad of things. There are definitions in all types of codes and policies and regulations and guidance documents by the federal government. I think we will have to wait until that fiscal year 2026 guidance for the REAP grant program is released to know exactly what that means. And then fourth and finally, ground-mounted solar projects proposing the use of really any FEOC-sourced materials. That is the foreign entity of concern. I know we've done a few videos and discussed that with Dale and Larry. If we're proposing or if the project is proposing to use materials sourced by a foreign entity of concern, there will be a penalty in the scoring as well. So those are the 4 items that we definitely know are going to change. The good news is if there's a silver lining, these exclusively impact ground-mounted solar projects. So as of today, we are not aware of any penalties or disincentivization of roof-mounted solar projects. So that is the latest that we have heard from the USDA at this time as far as scoring and grants go.
Great. So just to recap that and also put a bow around it, in terms of the financing, we're talking about USDA specific financing. Customers can still go out and get their own financing for these projects that shouldn't have an impact on this. These are just loans that are coming directly from the USDA that would no longer be eligible. And then ground mounts, depending on either the size or FEOC or whatnot, you will probably lose points for that. The extent of that loss, we don't know yet until the guidance comes out. Do you have any idea when we can expect this guidance for 2026?
So we were certainly hoping that technically the fiscal year is slated to begin in very short order. Depending on when this video gets published, we might be right up against that timeline. I would expect if the guidance isn't released by the time this video is published, I would fully expect it to come shortly thereafter. We're probably looking at mid to end September. If it rolls into early October, that certainly wouldn't be unheard of to receive some late guidance. But I would expect it in the next 30 to 45 days, we should have something.
Yeah. And then let's just bring some clarity to those quarterly dates. So when we talk about the October date, is that an October 31st deadline to get it submitted and into the USDA, received by the USDA?
So as far, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. And then maybe the timeline to get all of the required paperwork and information to your installer or your grant writer.
Yeah, so as far as we know, if the way that rounds are held, the competitive rounds are hosted, do not change, you would expect them to follow a calendar year cycle. So January 1st through March 31st would indicate one round, April 1st through June 30th, so on and so forth. So the next round that we are expecting would follow October 1st of 2025 through December 31st of 2025, with December 31st being the actual deadline to get an application submitted for competition. History serves to show that typically within 60 days of a deadline, the USDA will announce awards for that prior round. So if you submit an application by December 31st of 2025 and you are awarded a grant, you will typically have that information by the end of February 2026.
That makes sense. So when we talk about an October round now coming up, we're not talking about a deadline in October. We're talking about the fiscal year starting October 1st, but ending and the deadline to get your grant submitted by the end of the year.
That's exactly right.
Right. Great. So really at this point, just we don't really know what's going to happen with the guidelines. We could be surprised with what comes out, which would be no shocker with this administration when the guidelines come out. But as of now, we are expecting this first 2026 fiscal quarter round to occur, and we can start hoping to be able to start submitting applications in the beginning of next month. If you're applying for a ground mount, you're probably going to lose some points, the extent of which we don't know. But other than that, everything else seems to be in place. The ability to apply for a 25% grant or a 50% grant. And we don't know funding levels of either of those at this point.
That's correct. Yep. Funding levels themselves are unknown.
So still a challenge. Maybe we should also just talk about, because I do think that this has an impact on USDA, and that is safe harboring projects in order to get the ITC, the investment tax credit, which is going away for commercial projects in the coming years. And there's a real push to get projects safe harbored this year, signed up with their deposit to meet the started construction requirements so that they can have their 4 years to install the project, but also and still retain that investment tax credit, but also to avoid the foreign entities of concern, FEOC requirements, which are it's going to be an administrative burden, potentially raise costs as well, which will happen if they sign up after this year. And so it's a challenge to think about projects that are applying for a grant and as well as we want to safe harbor. How should customers potentially think about that or navigate that?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, what people want to consider is what level of risk am I willing to take, and what level of investment am I willing to make in this project sooner rather than later is the reality. And I know we have some videos on this, but when it comes to safe harboring projects, there are essentially two methods that can be used. One is to pay a certain amount, about 5%. We typically look closer to 7% to adjust for inflation or any changes that could negatively influence project costs. You pay for equipment up front, and by paying that 5%, you effectively safe harbor your project and earn yourself 4 years to complete that project. The other method is to pursue physical work, which is lot more involved, to
Yeah.
be honest. It requires continuity and showing that you're continuing to develop a project. So discussing with either your accountant or tax professional or your contractor who's helping to develop the project, definitely evaluate those options. And if you would like to sort of stack those incentives and also go for a grant, it's more than likely going to be possible if you are confident that you're able to get your project safe harbored, especially when you have a 4-year window. So at this time, I don't see any risk with applying for a grant, knowing that your project will be safe harbored.
Correct. And I think there's two important pieces here to mention with that. Number one, that 5% or 7% will lower the grant award amount slightly because the purchase price of the solar will be reduced by that much. So there'll be a minimal reduction in your grant amount if you pursue that path, but also that you cannot buy the project contingent on getting the USDA grant and secure the ITC. In order to safe harbor, it has to be a binding contract. So you need to just know that we're going to apply for the USDA grant for you, or you can apply for the USDA grant. You may or may not get it, but that doesn't prevent you from or stop the project from moving forward.
Yep, exactly.
Well, anything else you'd like to add? I think we really covered a wealth of information in this discussion. So thank you for that. Any closing comments or thoughts?
I think at the end of the day, I would just share the advice that people should always feel comfortable reaching out to Paradise Energy Solutions with questions, concerns. If there's any confusion on the seemingly constant changes in federal policy and regulatory structures and things of that nature, feel free to reach out when it comes to solar projects, and we can certainly provide you some great guidance. We've built out a wealth of knowledge, as you said, Warren, and several robust programs when it comes to grants and safe harboring, and we're certainly here to help.
Well, thank you, Sam. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. This was really informative, and we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Warren.